The Orioles had the worst roster in baseball. They lost a record 115 games in one season and had an owner who fans despised. That was just 6 years ago. Now, some call them the best team in baseball. They consistently have one of the best records in the American League, with one of the best shortstops, best pitchers, and new ownership. But let's not forget how awful that they were not long ago, as one of the worst teams in baseball and one of the worst minor league systems in MLB ranked at number 27. And believe it or not, it was actually very common for them to rank that badly. As for their record in the division, only one time had they ever won their division in the 2000s. But under a new regime, using another team strategy and modifying it, they're on the brink of winning the AL East division back to back. The Baltimore Orioles currently have more hype around them than they've had since the 90s. In 1993 specifically, Peter Angelos bought the Orioles for $173 million. It was the most expensive sports team deal in sports history. But safe to say, they made that money back by just owning the team, as they made about $1 million every week and owned the team for about 1,599 weeks. What that means is that they brought in about $1.5 billion off of owning the Baltimore Orioles. But when they bought the team, they were on a 10-year playoff drought, and it seemed to have no direction on team building. While they did make it to the ALCS in 1996 and 1997, the Orioles were about to go through one of the worst periods in their team's history. However, let's not forget how bad they were even before the 90s.
And in baseball, the Baltimore Orioles tied a major league record yesterday that they would just as soon forget. Milwaukee handed Baltimore its 13th straight loss, and that equals the worst start ever by a major league team.
The Orioles' 1988 losing season was clearly awful, but it wasn't as bad as their losing seasons from 1998 all the way to 2012, not once making the playoffs during that span. But in the midst of all the losing during that time and all the failure, the Orioles decided to hire a new general manager, a hire that only scared fans. Now, why did it scare them? That's because several team executives declined the job with Baltimore, including two top executives. This scary new face in town was Dan Duquette, who was hired almost immediately after the 2011 season and had a vision of building the team the old school way, meaning he was going to stick to traditional scouting and signing veteran players. But as old school as he was, Duquette had always been trying to get the analytical advantage in his front office. In the early 90s, when he worked as general manager for the former MLB team, the Montreal Expos, he hired a researcher to build advanced scouting software for the front office to use. After his days with the Expos, he was with the Red Sox in the 90s. He signed and drafted legends like Tim Wakefield, Johnny Damon, Jason Varitek, Manny Ramirez, and many more. But undisputedly, his best move was trading for a top 5 pitcher in MLB history, Pedro Martinez. So he had a resume of doing a lot of good things, and was joining a team that had a reputation of doing a lot of bad things. They had pieces though, like top 5 pick in the upcoming draft, they had a rising infielder in Manny Machado, and established pitchers like Chris Tillman. But change was going to be coming, and quick. In Dan Duquette's first full offseason with the O's, he moved on from fan favorite pitcher Jeremy Guthrie. Jeremy had an average pitched 6.1 innings per game and made a quality start in 57% of his Orioles starts. This was a heartbreaking move for Oriole fans, but at least in return they got starting pitcher Jason Hamill to pitch at least a couple seasons with them. But Hamill wasn't the only pitching addition. The next one was a pitcher out of Japan in his first offseason, along with pitcher Miguel Gonzalez out of Mexico. These 3 additions were all pitchers, and were going to easily change this rotation. In 2012, the team finally made their first postseason berth since 1997, finishing with their top record in decades at 93-69. Plus, late in the season, they found first baseman Steve Pearce in free agency, who would stay with the team for multiple seasons. Future star Manny Machado also made his debut when he hit for a .739 OPS and provided the team a 1.5 wins above average, meaning he was the reason for at least 1.5 wins. But as good as the year had gone, the postseason was what mattered in Baltimore. They played the Texas Rangers in the wildcard game and they won, but they fell short to the New York Yankees in Game 5 of the series. But the important part for Baltimore was that they finally won a playoff game, ending their longtime playoff drought, bringing momentum and hope for this city. But after losing, they would go through a dark winter, signing virtually nobody in what was a quiet offseason and a disappointment for most fans. One of the only external signings that they did make was signing a 7 ERA pitcher. Regardless, expectations were still very high in Baltimore. But in typical Orioles fashion, 2013 would fall short of these expectations, finishing with a record of 85-77 and missing out on the playoffs. As for their bats, they were on fire nearly all year long, finishing with a top 5 offense in baseball, but one of the biggest problems with the O's was that their starting pitchers could barely get past the 5th inning, leaving the bullpen tired throughout the entire year. Their pitching overall was 23rd in all of baseball, and the bullpen was ranked at 15th in MLB. Duquette felt the pitching certainly needed to improve, and needed to improve fast. So by the 2014 season, they added onto the rotation with a free agent by the name of Jimenez. The year prior, Jimenez pitched for a .330 ERA in the Cleveland Indians. However, because they signed him, it meant that they would lose their 17th overall pick in the first round of the upcoming draft. They thought it was worth the cost of a draft pick in order to make the rotation that much better, which, by the way, their pitching was shaping up to be one of the best. Pitcher Kevin Gausman made his debut the year prior. He was a top 5 pick in the 2012 MLB draft. As for the team's offense, they signed Nelson Cruz heading into 2014. Cruz is a guy who had been in Major League Baseball since 2005 and had plenty of Major League experience. And typically, he had a lot of homers with a solid OPS. And that's exactly what happened in the 2014 season.
Deep left field, that ball's gonna go down the line and gone!
The Nelson Cruz signing was paying off as he hit for a .271 average, .859 OPS, and led MLB in home runs with 40. The team's offense finished as the 8th best in baseball, driving in 745 runs. As for the pitching, the team ended the season with the 7th best ERA in all of baseball with a .343 ERA, along with the top 6 bullpen in the entire league. The team finished with a record of 93-66, winning the AL East for only the 2nd time since 1983. They began the postseason starting out hot by sweeping the Tigers in the divisional, with the offense scoring 12 runs in Game 1, 7 runs in Game 2, and a pitching duel in Game 3 with a final score of 2-1. But just one round later in the American League Championship Series, the team's pitching would collapse in Game 1 and 2, and the offense virtually disappeared in Game 3 and 4, which resulted in an Orioles sweep. While their season was now over, the team's record up to that point, being led by Dan Duquette, was 274 wins and 212 losses. His tenure was going as well as it could have been, and fans had hope in their future, but almost as soon as that 2014 season ended, the Orioles' magic would suddenly go dry and things would get dark really fast. Dan Duquette spent several months trying to leave Baltimore and land a job in Toronto in what would have felt like a promotion for him. But because Orioles owner Peter Angelos refused to give away their longtime executive, it was never very close to happening. What Angelos said was that the Blue Jays expressed interest in their longtime executive, but the Orioles are not negotiating with them in any way regarding to the news. It's said that if the Blue Jays would have been willing to give up top prospects like Jeff Hoffman and 2 other top prospects, the Orioles may have actually traded him away. But in 2015, on January 25th, a report confirmed that he was staying in Baltimore for good. However, this actually wasn't very good news, as the offseason was flat out terrible. They let longtime outfielder Nick Markakis leave the team in free agency, and the star signing of the last offseason, Nelson Cruz, not come back. Ultimately, the Orioles believed that they could replace these players, but it just never happened. They instead wasted prime seasons of Manny Machado and Jonathan Schwoob. The next few seasons were mediocre at best, with a record of 245 wins and 328 losses and only 1 playoff berth. They also may have given out the worst contract in MLB back in 2016 to Chris Davis when they gave him a 7-year deal worth $161 million. By 2017, it truly did feel like the beginning of the end for this era, at least by the end of 2017. They began the year 15-8 in April and stayed in first place by the end of May. The problem with the Orioles was that they proceeded to have 3 months consecutively of all-out losing. In August, they finally had a winning record for a change at 17-12, which would be their last winning month for the next 4 years. But undisputedly, the worst part was that Machado's contract was nearing its end, causing fans to question how the Orioles were going to be handling Machado, whether he would be extended or traded. However, there was one thing that was clear: the pitching was awful and finished with a rotation ERA of .570. To put that into perspective, the highest team rotation in 2024 is the Marlins with a .481 ERA. Thanks to the poor hitting and pitching, they had a 7-20 record stretch towards the end of the year, putting them 10 games out of the second wildcard spot. As for the division, they were 18 games out of winning the AL East and were last place in their division. One player would say something negative, saying, "hard fade in September," while another player took a positive approach, saying, "the team was a bunch of dogs." But no matter how you thought of this team, 4 of the 6 pitchers who started the most games for them were about to become free agents, all of whom who were also on the lower scale for performance. Overall, the O's finished with a record of 75-87. Despite this, ownership decided to let Dan keep his job for at least one more year. This was one of the final decisions ever made by Peter Angelos, as in the 2018 season, leadership flip-flopped from father Peter Angelos to son John Angelos due to Peter's old age and health concerns. In that offseason heading into 2018, Dan chose not to re-sign J.J. Hardy, who was one of the best defenders on their team. Dan's plan to replace them, well, it was to play multiple different prospects who never ended up working out ever. The 2018 Orioles team completely failed to satisfy the Oriole way of pitching and defense. It was in fact nothing like the Orioles teams of the past, and it was instead extremely flawed top to bottom. The Orioles' big free agent signing was pitcher Alex Cobb, who got signed to a 4-year deal, guaranteed to make $57 million altogether and make $14 million per year. His awful numbers tell the entire story about how it went in Baltimore for Alex Cobb. By August 1st, they were an entire 42 games below 500 at 33-75. At the trade deadline, drastic decisions had to be made, so crazy things ended up happening. Faces of the franchise were traded for good, but the hardest player to let go was undoubtedly Manny Machado. He was in the organization for 7 years and performed as the team's superstar on a consistent basis. Letting him go came at what seemed like a steep price, as he was traded to the Dodgers and returned for 5 total prospects. The Dodgers ended up getting Machado and a World Series berth against Boston, whereas the Orioles ended up getting Dean Kremer, who ended up being the only long-term asset in the trade. The second move that went down was getting rid of longtime second baseman Jonathan Schoop, who had been with the team for 6 total years. In return for Schoop, they landed second baseman Jonathan Villar as the main trade piece. Neither of these trades ended up mattering in the long term, but one thing was clear: the teardown of this roster was not over. Top pick Kevin Gausman, who was in his 6th year with the organization, had never ever became an elite pitcher, so they decided to trade him to the Atlanta Braves. This trade didn't make an impact quite immediately, but they did acquire a future MLB closer in Evan Phillips, but we'll get into him later. By September, their record was 40 wins and 96 losses, and they were the worst team in baseball, finishing 61 games behind the Red Sox, who had the best record in MLB. To add insult to injury, the Orioles made the decision to release outfielder and defensive specialist Craig Gentry that month. Sure, his bat was poor with a .269 batting average and a .688 OPS, but he wasn't any worse than most of the other players. The entire Orioles lineup actually had a combined negative 23.3 wins above average, meaning if the Orioles had an average hitter and defender at each position, they would have had an extra 23 wins on the season. It also doesn't help that they decided to sit longtime Oriole Adam Jones, all because that they decided to play their young prospects, who, by the way, never ended up panning out. Adam Jones' defense was pretty terrible though, with a negative 14 runs saved in the outfield. But still, why damage your relationship with a player like that? To be fair, Jones almost was traded at the deadline, but he vetoed it, keeping him in Baltimore, where he had been for almost 10 years. But one player who they did choose to play the majority of the season was first baseman Chris Davis, who after being given a mega extension, had his worst season to date, hitting for a .168 batting average, a .539 OPS, and a 2.8 WAR. Unbelievably, these were the lowest numbers among qualifying players in MLB history. The team as a whole grounded into 132 double plays, which was the 3rd worst in MLB. They had 990 more strikeouts than walks in 2018, ranking bottom 5 in MLB. The only thing that their bats were actually doing that was positive was hitting home runs, where they ranked 14th in the league, but it cancels itself out whenever you look at their very high strikeout numbers. This disastrous season was a mix of bad front office men, bad bats, but also the pitching taking a major turn for the worse despite the heavy emphasis that was put on the pitching in the past, resulting in a poor .519 team ERA, the worst in all of baseball. One of the most interesting things about this season was that pitcher Nestor Cortes Jr. made his MLB debut, but he struggled and he ended up having a future with another team. However, they did break records in the amount of games they lost, being tied as the 4th worst team in MLB history with their win-loss ratio. This was the breaking point though for the Angelos family with GM Dan Duquette and team manager Buck Showalter. And finally, the organization did something positive, one of the best decisions that they had ever made, which was hiring a new GM, bringing a new sense of life, former Astros executive Mike Elias. Mike worked in the Astros front office for nearly a decade, flat out copied their strategies, and would bring in many former Astro executives to work with him when he got the Orioles job. But you may be wondering what exactly Mike Elias' plan was that he copied, which, if we go back to the 2009 Astros season, it'll paint out the bigger picture. In 2009, Houston had the worst farm system in MLB by far, and it remained that way for many years. But that would all change when Elias was hired in 2012, when the Astros were the bottom feeders. They were coming off of a 2011 season before he got there, where they were 56 and 106, ranking last place in their former division, the NL Central. But Elias' main strategy, which he learned from his boss Jeff Lugo, was called the portfolio approach. They would draft underslot for early picks, in other words, drafting players earlier than projected in hopes of signing them for less than the assigned slot value. And then, he can take the savings from the underslot picks and use it to accumulate more talent throughout the draft by going overslot on later picks. If you look at this chart, it clearly shows that nearly all of his first round picks have been underslotted with the Orioles and with the Astros. He was able to pick up on strategies so well like this one because Jeff Luhnow and Mike Elias worked together for many years prior to the Astros days. In fact, they won a World Series title together in 2006 when they were both serving as scouts. His boss Luhnow said this about him: Mike has the benefit having seen 2 different successful models that have both gone through a lot of transformation. He's going to be able to identify in a way that others might not be able to, which is what the Orioles actually need to do to be consistently good again. Whereas the second round picks have been overslotted due to the money that they saved with their first pick. Now, outside of this strategy, he made a clear impact with helping the team decide on multiple different draft picks. But the best one was by far Elias' push to draft Carlos Correa in 2012 with the first overall pick in the MLB draft. It was Elias' first season and he pushed hard for it, surprising virtually everyone when it was done, as even Baseball America's final mock draft had Correa falling to pick 7. So clearly, Elias made his impact as the Astros did draft Correa at pick 1, allowing them to have a long-time shortstop option, but also impacted their second round pick. With that second rounder, they were able to pick starting pitcher Lance McCullers and pay him more bonus money than usual, all because of the cash that they saved by underslotting on Correa. But drafting good talent is meaningless if you're unable to develop the talent. So what was Houston's actual plan to develop? The Astros were interested in getting ahead and gaining an analytical advantage over every other team. Mike Elias may have been just a scout, but he was able to learn off of many of his bosses. GM Jeff Lugo said, "We now have so much technology around the ballpark and information about the trajectory of the ball, the physics of the bat swing, the physics and the biomechanics of the pitcher's delivery. So many components that now advanced scientists have worked into our game." Obviously, it was going to take a while for things to change on the field, with the team losing 111 games in 2013, the most games that they had ever lost in their team's history, and then they lost 92 of them in 2014. On the bright side, in Luhnow's first 3 MLB drafts, 2012, 2013, and 2014, 24 of his draft picks made it to the major leagues, which is no surprise as Luhnow hit on many draft picks with the Cardinals front office, whether it was Matt Carpenter or Trevor Rosenthal. What makes that even more impressive is that in those same seasons, they had a major scandal tied to them. When Luhnow and Elias were with the Cardinals before getting a job with the Astros, they worked with the scout Christopher Correa. That same man hacked into the Houston Astros player personnel database and their email systems. He ended up pleading guilty to 5 counts of unauthorized access of this database from 2013 to 2014. That was also around the same time that Christopher was promoted in the front office to Director of Baseball Development. However, after receiving that promotion in June of 2014, Jeff Luhnow reported that their database had been hacked, and federal prosecutors said the hacking cost the Astros about $1.7 million, at least whenever we take into account how Correa had used the Astros data to draft players. According to The Athletic, the FBI said that Correa gained access using a password similar to a Cardinals employee who had to turn over his Cardinals' own laptop to Correa when he was leaving for a job with the Astros in 2011. With that password, he was able to obtain a file of the Astros scouting list of every single eligible player for that year's draft. He also viewed notes of the Astros trade discussions, bonus details, and even different statistics. But as soon as this news came out, he was fired and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison, forever tainting the Cardinals' 2013 and 2014 success and costing them 2 top draft picks. In those same seasons, their drafting didn't work out very well, and the portfolio strategy failed with the drafting of 2 pitchers who ended up becoming draft busts. The 2015 season, though, would be a lot different than the previous 2 on the field and in the draft room. On August 5th, 2015, the team had a record of 53-50, only 3 games above 500, and while it was a bumpy road on a path to the postseason all around, the draft was undoubtedly phenomenal. In 2015, the Astros took Kyle Tucker at pick 5 in the first round, an all-around future MLB superstar outfielder. And they also even got a longtime third baseman, their future Alex Bregman, in the first round. On the field, the team finished with a record of 86-76, making it their best performance in nearly 10 years. They ended the season as a playoff team, beating the New York Yankees in the wildcard round in what was a shutout, but failing to beat the Kansas City Royals. 2016 would unfortunately be a step back for the team overall, but they came back with a vengeance in 2017 to say the least.
The Houston Astros are world champions!
According to general manager Jeff Lugo, there were 4 steps to a winning team in 2017, which was build the best analytics infrastructure, set up elite scouting and player development systems, become a leader in technology and innovation, and maximize the performance of athletes through medical practice. This team was simply unbelievable, resulting in an MVP from Jose Altuve, but that's not without explanation, as the Astros actually committed what was the worst scandal in modern MLB history, where they were stealing other teams' signs, knowing what pitch was coming next, when to swing, when to take a ball, when to take a strike, and when to steal. Luckily for Mike Elias, it's been reported that he was not a part of this in any way other than being in the organization. Regardless of the cheating scandal, this sparked the beginning of a truly elite span, arguably the best span by a team in the last 20 years. They made it to 7 straight seasons of being in the ALCS, and even won a legitimate World Series in the 2022 season. They've been able to let important pieces go, like outfielder George Springer, shortstop Carlos Correa, but have also been able to immediately replace them. So it's safe to say, this Astros blueprint was going to carry over into the Orioles front office. In fact, it felt like Mike Elias gave the front office an immediate makeover, making 65 new hires within the organization in just 18 months. And according to the New York Times, some teams like the Red Sox employ a research and developmental staff of 15 or more people, whereas a team like the Orioles had almost no analyst up until Mike Elias came. Arguably the best hire ended up being the team's manager Brandon Hyde, who is viewed by many as a top 10 manager in the league. When Elias hired Brandon Hyde, they sucked, and he told them specifically, "I'm not hiring you to replace you when we get more talented," guaranteeing that he had job security. Leading up to opening day in 2019, the team was far from good, but the people making the decisions were all on the same page. Right before the season ended, the O's were active in trying to get a pitching prospect and did it when they traded outfielder Mike Yastrzemski in return for pitcher Tyler Herb. But Mike Elias could only do so much in the span of when he was hired to opening day, leaving the on-field results much of the same. One article called the 2019 Orioles the worst team of all time. They had the worst bullpen ERA in MLB at a 5.79 ERA, with the pitching staff in general leading the most home runs given up in the season. Their team ERA was no surprise either, at the bottom of MLB with a 5.59, the 7th worst by any team since 2000. As for the hitting, all the Oriole position players combined for just a 1.2 WAR, and it didn't help that just 3 players from the 2016 wildcard team were still on the roster. But this season wasn't completely bad, it actually had many bright spots. On the pitching staff, former draftee John Means had a great season pitching a 3.60 ERA. And for the best bat of the team, that award would go to Trey Mancini. He was a superstar in his hitting stats with an 899 OPS, 35 homers, and a 291 batting average. The bright spots also continue to grow, especially in the draft that same year, with the O's having the number 1 overall pick, which they used on catcher Adley Rutschman. He was the number 6 drafted catcher in the top 5 since 2007 up to that point. He also had the largest signing bonus by an MLB draft pick at $8 million. Some referred to him as a generational talent who would someday be better than MVP legend catcher Buster Posey. One person even called him the best draft pick since Bryce Harper. In college, we were able to see a glimpse of the generational talent that he would hopefully provide. Like in one specific at-bat in college, bases were loaded, and he was intentionally walked by the opposing team. In his sophomore year in college, he hit for a .408 batting average. A year later, hit for a .411 batting average in his junior year. Rutschman was the best player in 2018 in the College Baseball World Series, where he drove in 13 runs in 8 games and got 17 hits in the College Baseball World Series. He even ended his last NCAA regular season with the best on-base percentage in D1 and finished top 10 in batting average and slugging. Rutschman also walked twice as often as he struck out. But regardless of him being the first pick, was Rutschman actually even the best player in this draft? Was he the best Orioles draft pick? The answer is no. The best was the Orioles second rounder Gunnar Henderson, a player 29 total teams passed on. Now, he's a one-time Rookie of the Year winner and fought to be in the MVP race all season long in 2024, as we'll get into later. But outside of Adley and Gunnar, the Orioles' first 8 picks were all position players from round 8 to round 22. This draft class was clearly the best in all of baseball that season. As for their record, they had 54 wins, 108 losses, and were the second worst team in all of baseball. But going into the 2020 season, they had a different type of tone in Baltimore. The team actually had talent, veteran talent, and younger players as well. Things were moving into the right direction, but then outfielder Trey Mancini received heartbreaking news. He was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer and needed surgery to get it removed. The team was unsure whether he would return or not, but one thing was certain. This team was much better than 2019. They ended up finishing the 2020 shortened 60-game season with a record of 25-35, 10 games below 500, and even finally moved up in the division, finishing 4th place ahead of the Red Sox. If they played the full season, they were on pace for 68 wins, over 20 more than they had won in 2018. As for the team's payroll, it was sitting just under $24 million, certainly on the lower end. Regardless, the O's saw a massive jump in talent for the pitching staff, especially from relief pitcher Tanner Scott, who was a superstar with a 1.31 ERA and 25 bullpen appearances. And one of the main pieces in the Manny Machado trade, Dean Kremer, made his MLB debut that same season, and he had a 4.82 ERA and 4 total appearances. But the last pitcher to come up that year was Keegan Aiken, who in 2024 and 2023 has certainly made a name for himself. All Oriole pitchers who were under 25 went 4 for 6 with a 4.15 ERA and 11 starts and 68 relief appearances, outperforming the league average ERA under 25, which was 4.39. The pitching gave up a 2.64 batting average and a 7.95 OPS, compared to 2019 when they gave up a 2.71 average and an 8.45 OPS. But the true highlight all year for them was that the bats were on fire. 4th-year player Anthony Santander had his breakout year with a 261 batting average, hitting 11 homers, and had an 890 OPS, along with being a Gold Glove finalist. Jose Iglesias in his 10th year was having a superstar season with a 373 batting average and a 956 OPS. But the player Oriole fans seemed most excited about was first baseman Ryan Mountcastle, who hit for a 333 batting average. The team ranked 3rd in the American League for hits and batting average, 4th in bases, and 5th in doubles. The team was doing much better on the field and did a very good job of getting younger while also having valuable veterans like Jose Iglesias. Jose Iglesias even ended up getting traded in return for many top prospects. But one clear mistake that Mike Elias made that season was releasing bullpen arm Evan Phillips, who not long after became the LA Dodgers' full-time closer. Phillips had been given a long leash with a lot of clearly negative seasons, but him getting into the Dodgers pitching lab was clearly one of the best things to ever happen to him. But getting back to the Orioles, if you were an Oriole fan beyond the 2020 season, you probably know how bad that they were in 2021. I said earlier that if the Orioles played all of 2020, they would have won 68 games. Well, in 2021, they played a full season and only won 52 games. But at least Trey Mancini was able to rebound from cancer with a 255 batting average and a 758 OPS. And Ryan Mountcastle followed up his good rookie season by hitting 33 home runs, which was the most ever for a rookie on the Orioles. And then, in his 4th year, Cedric Mullins was healthy and had his breakout season, hitting 30 homers, stealing 30 bases, and was the AL's starting center fielder in the All-Star game. But the best moment of the entire season was 100% the no-hitter that pitcher John Means threw on May 5th against a 90-win playoff team in the Mariners. The problem is that this was one of the only good moments of their season. They went on an 18-game losing streak in 2021, which was almost the longest losing streak since the start of the century. If you look at their season, they gave up negative 129 runs in 105 games, but proceeded to give up 104 runs during their 18-game losing streak. They even managed to have a negative 297 run differential, meaning if you take all the runs they scored and subtract it with the amount of runs they gave up, you get a negative number. Their team ERA was .584, the worst in the last 24 years. They finished with the worst record in baseball and were 20-56 against AL East opponents. General manager Mike Elias, however, was in the midst of building up the Orioles farm system. For reference, you may recognize most of their names on the top prospect list, whether that's Adley, Grayson, DL, Gunnar, Colton. These are all notable players who are making an impact today. In that same 2021 season, they actually drafted outfielder Colton Cowser, along with a total of 19 college players and only 2 high school players. Which, ultimately, this brings us into the Orioles draft and organizational ideals. In 2022, the O's Vice President of Player Development and Domestic Scouting, Matt Blood, said, quote, "We have some organizational non-negotiable philosophies or values, and what we needed to do was find and hire a bunch of people that either believed in those or were willing to push those, and that's what we initially did." Elias, when talking about building a staff, said, "Having guys with tech at the top of their list and guys with lived baseball experience at the top. We value both, and trying to synthesize that to get the right chemistry on every staff is a very tricky, ongoing balance that we've been trying to deal with for almost 10 years now." So that's how they hire people, but what is their strategy specifically for drafting and developing talent? A rival scout said this on the Orioles drafting strategy, saying, quote, "They draft for VBA." Now, what is VBA? It is vertical bat angle. According to The Athletic, vertical bat angle is the angle of the bat respective to the ground, judged directly behind or in front of the batter. A steeper bat path is generally associated with the potential to lift the ball better, though it can have some ramifications when it comes to swing and miss in parts of the zone. In other words, it's great to be steep low in the zone, but it's hard to maintain that steepness and still hit a ball at the top of the zone. But that isn't the only way that they draft or develop players. Other top executives have multiple ideas for how the Orioles go through their process. One rival assistant general manager said, "They draft guys with present power and improve their launch angle and swing decisions." They also said, that present power is there in the form of top-end exit velocities, not necessarily slugging percentage. They teach vertical bat angle to reduce ground ball rates, swing decisions plus better vertical bat angle equals power production when those top-end exit velocities exist. In simpler terms, if you find a hitter who has good raw power and you add on to them with good swing decisions and improve their bat path, odds are you're going to have a lot of very good hitters. And for their plan to improve these raw power hitters, Matt Blood said, "We were acquiring players with these skills and we were finding coaches and building resources to reinforce these skills and then putting them to work. Our training environments are very competitive, very difficult. That leads to more efficiency in terms of learning skills." According to Swing Graphs, the company that tracks MLB swing path data, their 3 top prospects in Jackson Holliday, Kobe Mayo, and Heston Kjerstad were, according to The Athletic, second best in the league when compared to other top position player prospects in terms of their path score, which incorporates vertical bat angle. Then, there was also another MLB analyst who researched and found that the Orioles minor leaguers have the second highest launch angle in the sport, which also stays consistent having a good vertical bat angle. If you're unfamiliar with launch angle, basically it's the vertical angle at which the ball comes off of a player's bat. And yet again, according to The Athletic, another unique part about Baltimore is that they are the only team in MLB that's in the top 5 for slugging in both top and bottom thirds of the zone. And if you don't know what slugging is, basically it determines the productivity of a hitter, factoring in their at-bats and their performance. A rival hitting coach also managed to pick up on another trait, which is that every single one of the Orioles All-Stars has a very high baseball IQ. He said, "Everyone has a specific way that they are going to have success that night. The high IQ allows them to know what the pitcher is trying to do to them that day and adjust their swing path and approach on a pitcher-to-pitcher level." During the season, Mike Elias ended up saying that they have a 10-year window and said, quote, "I think it's liftoff from here for the team." A 10-year window is a major improvement from their prior window from 2012 to 2016, when they had the best combined record in the AL, to only 2 years later in 2018 and 2019, having one of the worst teams in MLB history. During the 2022 MLB draft, the window may have even grown longer.
The Baltimore Orioles select Jackson Holliday, a shortstop from Stillwater High School in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
He's the son of former MLB star Matt Holliday, and Jackson progressed through the minors at rapid speed, as we'll get into later. 2022 also featured the call-up of Felix Bautista, which is when he became a dominant closer for the Orioles. He throws very hard at 100 miles an hour and has an 87-mile-an-hour curveball. But the Orioles team building certainly was not perfect, and they made a mistake when they traded reliever Tanner Scott to the Marlins, similar to the Evan Phillips situation. Scott became a superstar closer, one of the best in baseball, and was eventually traded from the Marlins to the Padres in return for 4 different prospects. Furthermore, the Orioles would have had the best pen in baseball with Phillips, Scott, and Bautista, but it just is what it is. The Orioles saw many of their top prospects make their debut that year, like third baseman / shortstop Gunnar Henderson and switch hitting catcher Adley Rutschman. In the team's record, the talent was clearly showing. In fact, they were 46-46 in the first half and had a 37-33 record in the second half. The O's finished with a positive record above 500 at 83-79, which was their first above 500 season since 2016. After this awesome finish, GM Mike Elias said, "We're going to be signing players this winter." Elias said, "I'm very excited about it." And right as 2023 began, Mike Elias found an emerging player who he liked a lot. That player was 29-year-old Ryan O'Hearn, who they acquired January 3rd for cash considerations, an overall career journeyman who would later play a pivotal role for the Orioles. O'Hearn was once good. At 24 years old, he homered in his first game ever and had a .950 OPS in 44 games. But over the next few seasons, his bat was virtually non-existent. According to The Athletic, he would watch videos on hitting over and over again at all hours of the night. O'Hearn said, "It was a very selfish time where I was only thinking about why things were going wrong and what can I do to get better. The way I was treating the people I love wasn't right." He was then imagining what would happen if MLB didn't work out, whether he would play in Japan or be an insurance agent. But on January 3rd, he got the call in the middle of working out and became an Oriole. He was DFA'd 2 days later, then 7 days later he accepted to be outrighted to AAA, and his life was changed and his career was saved. The Orioles' 3 hitting coaches didn't just have a plan, they developed an entire portfolio to save O'Hearn's career. According to The Athletic, they fixed his posture first, eliminating the hunching that allowed him to drive the ball to left field really well, but exposed him with anything inside. He started hitting balls on a backspin to right field. They worked with him on understanding how to hit breaking balls better in the air and not pound it into the ground. O'Hearn began seeing results and said, "It wasn't, man, I'm getting lucky. I was really starting to make space in my stance and was able to adjust to different pitches." It was said that being in an environment with Cedric Mullins and Adley Rutschman made players turn it up a little bit. Since then, O'Hearn has offered defensive flexibility, can play first base and the outfield, along with a great bat, hitting for a .289 average in 2023 and an .801 OPS. As for the established Orioles, Gunnar Henderson was a superstar, .814 OPS, .255 average, 28 homers, and a 6.3 WAR. Adley Rutschman improved on his 2022 in certain areas, this time for more home runs, and had a higher average and OPS. As for the hitting staff, only a few months into the season, starter Kyle Bradish got hurt, and Grayson Rodriguez was called up and pitched a .407 ERA. But only a month later in May, his ERA jumped up to .735, resulting in him being sent down. He wouldn't pitch in the month of June, but would come back in July as a brand new pitcher, pitching a .318 ERA and finish the year with a .435 ERA. The pitching was clearly the biggest improvement, especially when Kyle Bradish was healthy and on the mound. He had a .283 ERA, which was significantly better than his 2022. The team's record was 101 wins and 61 losses, good for the best record in the AL. But in typical Oriole fashion, something bad happened when Felix Bautista had to undergo Tommy John surgery right before the postseason, also taking him out all of 2024. But for a good thing, they were the 1 seed in the playoffs, meaning that they immediately jumped into the ALDS, skipping the wildcard round. They were facing a tough Rangers team, but the Orioles were still heavy favorites in this series. But when no one expected it, Texas swept Baltimore in a series that the Orioles couldn't hit one game, couldn't pitch the next, and again couldn't hit. Manager Brandon Hyde said, "This team is going forward. Heads up, it's going to be a really good club." Shortstop Gunnar Henderson said, "We are definitely going to take this into the offseason and use it as fuel to make a World Series push." After the season, ownership even signed a 30-year lease to keep the Baltimore Orioles in Camden Yards, which is viewed as a top stadium in MLB. That was step one to a very good offseason in Baltimore, but the next step was building the team for 2024. And the good thing is Elias had a plan, and it was a good one. He said, "We would really like to upgrade our rotation and then also the back end of our bullpen with Felix Bautista out, whether that comes in the form of a free agent signing or a trade. I don't know yet. I'm taking note of the fact that there are a lot of teams that are going for it right now, so it seems like a very competitive market on both fronts." For the bullpen, they did add on whenever they signed veteran Craig Kimbrell to fill in the role of Felix Bautista. This wasn't the only pitching decision that they made, as they also made one when they hired a new pitching coach, which Elias knew of Drew French's ability because he too worked in Houston. This was good news. The only thing is that Orioles fans were looking for something big, a true ace for the rotation, a pitcher who they could count on. But before anything like that happened, arguably the best news of the organization in the last 30 years happened in January.
But there's a report out there right now that the Baltimore Orioles have been sold for in the neighborhood just north of $1.7 billion to a couple billionaires. So the Angelos family looks like they'll be getting out, or at least maybe maintain a minority stake, but they're going to sell the team and the Orioles might have a new direction.
New owner David Rubitside said, "Our collective goal will be to bring a World Series trophy back to the city of Baltimore. To the fans I say, we do it for you and can't do it without you. Thank you for your support." He also insisted that he, quote, intends to defer to Elias when it comes to roster decisions, and that he bought the team to give back to his hometown. This marked a true, new and defining time in Baltimore. And right as the Orioles' new owners were finalizing the sale, Mike Elias made the biggest trade of his career, acquiring superstar pitcher Corbin Burnes in return for prospects. Burnes is someone who won the Cy Young Award in 2021 with the Brewers, which is the most prestigious honor a pitcher can possibly have. This was believed by many to be the defining moment that could get them over the playoff hump, getting them into a World Series. But a few months later, after the sale of the new ownership, the longtime Baltimore Orioles owner Peter Angelos would tragically pass away at 94 years old, marking a new era in Baltimore. One thing that really stands out about the Orioles is that they are paying their entire starting lineup less than half of the $70 million that the Dodgers owe Shohei Ohtani in 2024. Showing how building a team through the draft can be effective in many ways. But when spring training began, the team had a major decision to make. Would the team call up #1 MLB prospect Jackson Holliday at just 20 years old, or would they keep him down in the minor leagues to develop? On March 22nd, the Orioles did decide that they would not be playing him on the opening day roster. However, on April 9th, he had a .333 batting average with 2 homers, 9 RBIs, 5 doubles, and 12 walks, leading the Orioles to begin thinking about a call-up.
The second thing I want you to tell him is that now it's time for him to ask permission to be on Jackson Holliday's pass list because you're going to the big leagues. Awesome.
Holliday, at only 20 years old, was stepping into the infield for Baltimore. It took him multiple games to get his first hit, but when he did, it sparked an Orioles rally to win the game. But in April, the same month he was called up, the Orioles made the decision to send him back down to the minors after he went 2 for 34 with 2 walks and 18 strikeouts. Several months later in July, they finally made the decision to recall Holliday, with him batting .271 with 10 homers in AAA. Mike Elias also said, "I think this is a big chance for him, and we're going to be giving him some time. This is a time period where he's got some runaway in front of him because of the vacancy that we have at second base right now." At the time, their record was 64-44, and they were atop the AL East. Since then, Holliday still hasn't been much better, struggling to even hit around the .200 batting average range. But the rest of the team has been exceptional, with a top 5 ranked offense, a top 15 pitching staff, and a team record that's been fighting to keep up with the Yankees. In fact, manager Brandon Hyde spoke about what it's been like trying to keep up with New York. He said, quote, "I give our guys a ton of credit for kind of hanging in there. There's been a lot of times where a team could lose 7 out of 8 games or 7 out of 9, simply because things are not going really well, and our guys have hung in there. You see, they fought, but it hasn't been easy." Before the season even technically began, they lost Kyle Bradish, John Means, and Taylor Wells to elbow surgeries. Others like starter Dean Kremer and multiple different bullpen arms have also missed multiple weeks throughout the season. The injury bug has also dramatically affected their hitters, like infielder Jorge Mateo, who suffered an arm injury that led to elbow surgery. Heston Kjerstad was out with a concussion after being hit in the face with a pitch, and infielder Jordan Westberg broke his wrist after being hit with a pitch. All these players had a pivotal role in the team and have gotten injured at points in the season. Manager Brandon Hyde had this to say about the injury challenges, saying, quote, "This year, things have changed. Guys have changed roles in the bullpen. We've lost starting pitchers and had to call more guys up. We have some young players out there. We've just had more injuries this year. It's been more challenging, honestly. I'm trying to stay patient and positive." Another thing is that consistency of Baltimore to always perform at their highest level has made them so good. But this year, Adley Rutschman is going through the first dry slump of his career and has hit as low as a .204 batting average with a .500 OPS in the second half of the season. Then we have Corbin Burnes, who had an electric first half at a .243 ERA, but up to mid-September has a .476 ERA and does not look like himself, making people wonder if he could possibly be injured. Arguably the worst part about the team has been closing out games. Having Felix Bautista made it easy, but Craig Kimbrell has not made it easy and was pitching a high 7 ERA in the second half as of mid-September. So what have they done to attempt to close games properly? They've resorted to multiple different players, one of whom is Sir Anthony Dominguez, who they acquired mid-season. Brandon Hyde added onto the situation, saying, "They're showing some toughness. I think our guys have learned a lot this year also. They've dealt with adversity that they've never had to deal with before." But the truth is, Mike Elias, the GM, has also dealt with adversity himself, specifically with Jackson Holliday. It seems no matter how he's performed in spring training or AAA, he simply has not hit at the MLB level. He's been called up twice and was sent down once. In August, he recorded 96 total at-bats, hitting for a .219 batting average and a .685 OPS. With the injuries that they've gone through in 2024, the weight will and has been on Jackson Holliday's shoulders, and he hasn't been able to handle it at all. But on the bright side, they have seen the young players perform like never before. Colton Cowser, the former first-round pick, has been very impactful for the Orioles, hitting over 20 homers this year, and pitcher Grayson Rodriguez has been dominant when he's been healthy. Grayson Rodriguez actually talked about what he expects this upcoming postseason to be like when he said, "I don't think anyone wants to face us, especially when everyone is back and moving at full gear. I think everybody is confident in that." But the biggest showing by far has been shortstop Gunnar Henderson. He's top 10 in the American League for home runs, he has a good batting average, and the OPS is high. Regardless of the prospects that have been called up, they were ranked as the third best farm system in baseball by MLB on August 15th, 2024. With new ownership, they get a chance to prove themselves this very season, with the opportunity to sign a long-term extension with star pitcher Corbin Burnes, who they just traded for last offseason. They still need to extend their core players as well, like Adley Rutschman and Gunnar Henderson. We truly don't know how this new ownership is going to react when it comes to extending talent. But if they're not willing to extend their core, it's safe to say that they will wind up just like the 2012 to 2016 Orioles and another mass rebuild. After losing last postseason, this core is going to have to overcome adversity to succeed. Which, there's also a player, Giancarlo Stanton, who's overcome more adversity than you could possibly imagine. To learn more about his impossible journey with the Yankees, click the video on your screen now.